Hi guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be discussing the Kuznets curve. And the Kuznets curve is an economic concept that hypothesizes an inverted U-shaped relationship between a country's economic development and its level of income inequality. It is named after a Nobel Prize winning economist Simon Kuznets, who suggested that as an economy develops, there is initially an increase in income inequality. There's an increase in income inequality followed by a decrease after a certain average income is reached. The concept is primarily used to understand how economic growth and income distribution interact over the course of development. The Nobel Prize winning economist Simon Kuznets developed a theory that as an economy moves from underdeveloped status into development, economic inequality will first increase, then level off, and then decrease as the economy becomes more developed. And his hypothesis was that in a poor country, most of the population is engaged in subsistence farming, and so inequality is low because everyone is extremely poor. And as industrialization begins and agriculture is mechanized and needs fewer laborers, people drift from the country farms to urban factories and they move to businesses where the pay is higher. Hence, a disparity emerges between the earnings of those who own and run the factories and the pay of those who work in them, and a disparity also between the factory workers and those left behind on the farms. This causes economic inequality as the process continues. But as the development matures, the theory suggests that income inequality decreases as the country becomes wealthier. As the country develops, average incomes per head rises and money is available to spend on social welfare programs as government revenues also rises with more economic development. When the country is fully developed, inequality will have fallen considerably from the peaks it had reached in the earlier stages of development. So guys, this was basically Simon Kuznets' hypothesis, and I mean, if we consider a developing country that begins to industrialize, so in the early stages, resources and capital will be concentrated in the hands of a few, right? Leading to income inequality, because as the industrial sector will be booming while the agriculture sector lags. Now, as the economy continues to grow, more opportunities will be created for education, employment, economy will grow. There would be an upward, mobility will start emerging. I mean, there would be an upward trend. And gradually, this will start reducing the income gap. So initially, what's going to happen is that his hypothesis was that rural populations might migrate to urban centers seeking work, often finding themselves in low-paying industrial jobs. But as these workers would gain the skills and economy diversifies into more sectors because it's growing, such as, let's say, services, technology, overall skill development would take place and, incomes of the workers would start rising. Wages would start to rise then. And obviously, with more growth, government revenues will be rising as well. So social welfare programs will be expanded as well, and they will rise as well, which will be another reason why it will contribute to a reduction in income inequality as the economy grows and progresses. So that's basically what Simon Kuznets told us, right? And this process reflects the initial upward curve of the Kuznets hypothesis. The initial upward curve of the Kuznets hypothesis, right, followed by a downward trajectory as the economy starts maturing itself and, starts distributing its gains and growth gains more evenly among its population, right? Now let's see where can we actually bring the Kuznets curve argument in our essays. So for example, if you're attempting a question on growth and development, and we say that we're talking about the benefits of growth, we say that economic growth results in and economic expansion results in higher incomes and real GDP is going up and economy is expanding itself, and living standards are increasing and people will come out of poverty and all of that stuff you're writing. And so we could bring in the argument that, okay, fine, yes, but then, the Kuznets hypothesis says that, maybe, and also if you're answering a question on developing economies, let's say we're answering a question on economic development and economic growth and development, linking it with living standards. So we could say that, okay, fine, the Kuznets curve suggests that initially, as the economy would develop, income inequality would start rising. Inequality would go up, and give the reasons that I mentioned, in the video, before it starts to decline, right? So initially, income inequality would increase. That's what Kuznets argued, before it starts declining, right? And so this is something that, and you can draw the curve as well. Draw the curve, talk about how it's increasing, and give the reason for it. You might not necessarily have to go into a lot of detail, but at least mentioning it, drawing it, mentioning it, would definitely make your essays look significantly better. And the argument that why the Kuznets curve matters, it definitely matters to to economists and policymakers, because the Kuznets curve provides valuable insights into potential, like I mentioned right now as well, economic consequences and socioeconomic consequences. In fact, yeah, it's more appropriate word would be socioeconomic consequences of economic growth and development. Right, because income inequality is a socioeconomic consequence of growth and development. And by understanding this relationship between economic development and inequality, if policymakers are able to understand this relationship properly, only then policymakers can better anticipate and mitigate the adverse effect of rising inequality during the early phases of development. So if economies are growing and the governments are making extreme efforts for development and growth, so if you are able to understand this relationship, as per the Kuznets, as what he suggested, then policymakers can anticipate that this is going to happen and then try to mitigate the adverse effects of rising inequality, which are bound to happen if this settles through, or if this settles in the economy as per, as if this actually happens in the economy as per what the Kuznets hypothesis says. Right? So we can prevent the adverse effects of rising inequality during the early phases of development, especially. And by studying the Kuznets hypothesis and understanding this connection, it also emphasizes the importance of ultimately transitioning. It tells us that it is ultimately important. Okay, fine, you will have to initially forego and make that trade-off of income inequality, and it will rise, but then ultimately it will settle down. So it's emphasizing the importance of transitioning towards a more knowledge-based industries, and focusing the trend of the country, and shifting the focus towards increasing access to education and vocational training, so that your labor grows and prospers and their wages rise, so that income inequality goes down. Increasing access to education and vocational training, and which will ultimately foster more equal distribution of economic prosperity, right? So recognizing that yes, Kuznets curve hypothesis holds true, and it has. So although data suggests that what the Kuznets suggested, it might not have worked for all the countries, but for some countries it has worked, right? And recognizing that yes, we might go through these stages as suggested by the Kuznets curve, governments can then come up with implemented target-based social policies to support those people who are most vulnerable to the negative impacts of early economic expansion. So Kuznets curve is simply telling us that economic expansion in the early years of a country, especially if your economies are developing, so income inequality, the negative effects of income inequality, especially on those people who are most vulnerable, that class that is most vulnerable, could be very high. So it helps us to mitigate then, right? And it helps the governments to understand that yes, it can come up with targeted social policies to support the most vulnerable, who will fall prey to the negative impacts of income inequality. At the same time, this concept helps us understanding the long-term benefits of enduring and going through the initial increase in inequality for making a long-term change to the economy itself, right? This concept helps in understanding the long-term benefits of enduring the entire, enduring the initial increase in inequality in order to achieve a more, for achieving a more equitable society as economic development continues, right? So that's all about the Kuznets curve, guys. We're done with this video. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, take care.